Hey listeners, Jonathan here. I just wanted to quickly share, just like how our community of listeners come from a variety of lifestyles and beliefs, our guests as well come from a variety of lifestyles and beliefs, with the one commonality that these are all change makers in their different fields. You may not share those beliefs, and that's totally okay. I would encourage you, though, not to allow that to deter you from listening in, as today's conversation carries many principles that are applicable for everyone in leading you to your one step. And it's an overall encouraging conversation. I hope you enjoy.
We took over this former retail box in the middle of the hood on Fowler Avenue, which at the time was in the heart of this community. It was called Suitcase City because it was so transient. High eviction rate, a lot of homeless people, a lot of drugs, crime, prostitution. So we began to do a lot of outreach stuff more than ever before. We ramped it up. We were just dreaming huge. We're going to give away 1,000 backpacks. Can we do that?
Goodness.
And 2,000 people showed up and we're like, oh my gosh,
Wow.
And so we were just really able to do so many things at a much bigger level. And that's when the city and different organizations and people really began to notice.
Hey friends, welcome to the One Step Podcast, where we're sharing inspirational stories of change makers in different fields, whether in business, nonprofit, etc., so you can gain practical insights for your one step, whether you're first or you're next. And friends, I can't describe how excited I am for today's conversation, as today's guest has been described as the man, the myth, the movement. I'm sure if Winston Churchill was here, he would say, listen now, I know I was the prime minister, but I don't know why I got the adjective of prime, because knowing Pastor Tommy, I am undeserving of the title. He is an author, a hip-hop artist, and get this, the lead pastor of Crossover Church in Tampa. Ladies and gentlemen, make some noise for Pastor Tommy Kyllonen.
Yeah, what's up, man? It's good to be with you today.
Thank you so much for being here, Pastor Tommy. I'm really excited for today's conversation. I know we had a conversation offline, but I do have a lot of high respect for you and what you're doing over at Crossover for many different reasons. Just seeing the impact that Crossover has had in the city of Tampa, not only in Tampa at large, but even inclusive of the urban context, to see people who were even incarcerated coming to really change their lives in a radical different direction. It's absolutely amazing just to see what you are doing, what your team is doing, and I'm really looking forward to today's conversation.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me today.
Well, Pastor Tommy, for listeners who don't know, I would love to ask if you could go ahead and let us know about your background. How'd you even end up at Crossover? And I know your story a little bit, but why Tampa? Why land on Tampa and planting yourself there?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm originally from Philly, and I'm looking at myself on the screen. I'm wearing my Sixers jersey today. So
Let's go.
I'm representing my roots, my hometown. But I have been here in Tampa for the longest period of my life, even longer than I was in Philly, because I was only in Philly till I was about 19, 20 years old. And I've been in Tampa now for longer than that. And so this has become home. And the way I got here was my first year of Bible college. I knew I was called to go in the ministry. I was in Philly going to Bible college. And I wasn't called to ministry till my second semester. I didn't really know why I was in Bible college. I said, God, I'll give you a year and then I'll go do whatever I want. I just felt like I needed to give God a year in Bible college. But then he gripped me up and got a hold of me and put a call to do ministry. And so I was still kind of honestly compromising quite a bit. Even though I was in Bible college, I was hanging around with some of my friends that weren't really following God. It was just a lot of negative influences. So I felt like, man, I just need to get away from the city. I need a fresh start. And so there was a couple other colleges that were related to the one that I was at. And there was one in the Midwest and there was one in Florida. And I was like, let's go to Florida. The beaches sound great and the weather. And so I came to Florida. I went to Southeastern Bible College, which is now known as Southeastern University. And I still have these plans of, man, when I finish, I'm going back up north. I'm going to plant a ministry, youth ministry, urban ministry in Philly and maybe in New York City, somewhere in that area. And then I met my wife there while I was in college. She's from Queens. And so we both had this plan for God. We're going back up north. Florida's great, but we're going back up north. But God didn't open up any doors. He opened up this door at this church in Tampa. We were in Lakeland, Florida, which Lakeland, especially back in the 90s when we were in school, was a very like traditional Southern town and very like divided, very separate. You had Southern white people over here, Southern black people over here. You had some Mexicans over here. You had snowbirds over here, and nobody really kind of talked to each other or hung out. Where I grew up at, everybody was together. I was used to diversity, same with my wife. And so, although we really liked the weather and everything else, we couldn't live in this kind of environment. This is not us. But little did we know, Tampa, which was only about 45 minutes away, was a bigger city that was very diverse, where everybody was together. And almost everybody that lived there was not from there. It was a new up and coming city. Everybody had moved there from up north, practically in the Caribbean. And so ended up in Tampa. And I've been here for over 20 years now. And it's been an amazing journey. I love it. It's home now, the 813. I will proudly wear a Bucks jersey too now.
Champa Bay.
There first. But now it's Champa Bay. It's Champa Bay, baby. We got Brady and everything. Like, so yeah, man, I love Tampa. And it's been amazing to watch the city grow the past couple of decades I've been here.
It's amazing just to see how you stay faithful and loyal to a certain city for 2 decades. And through that, it allowed you to not only just build influence with the community, but also see the community improve over time. Again, from people from all different contexts.
Yeah.
I've had the chance to spend some time over at Crossover last year, and specifically at Flavor Fest, which, quick plug, Flavor Fest is happening. The Urban Leadership Conference is happening this October. So for anyone who's in South Florida, in Florida, all over, feel free to come through. But anyhow, just being able to show up and see people of all walks of life over there, multi-ethnic, multi-class, all in one gathering together with one purpose, with one mission. Yeah. I've gotten to connect with some of your friends and team like EI and Longboy, and just hearing their stories is absolutely powerful. It just to see, again, what staying planted in a certain city for the long haul has allowed you to do. You were a big part of seeing Tampa rebuild from suitcase city into now a on-demand place to go to. And you were able to build influence with leaders in the city. I would love to ask, what were the things that you were doing in these past 2 decades that allowed you to build the influence with different leaders in order to see Tampa improve?
Yeah, I'd say first and foremost, we stayed faithful to the mission that God had for us. And that was to reach the urban community. And even if we didn't have resources, we were just trying to like figure it out and give our time and our talent. Even if we didn't have a lot of treasure, like we were just doing it. And little by little, people began to come alongside of us. And little by little, as the church grew, our influence grew, and some of our ability to have resources to share and bless the community with. We had more and more creatives and innovators in the mix to say, hey, man, we're going to figure this out. Crossover has always been people that have dreamed big beyond what we've had. Even in the very first year when I became the pastor 20 years ago, there was just a handful of us, less than 40 adults.
Wow.
And we're in this little rundown church building, but we didn't have any rent. The building was given to us. So we were able to begin to fix the building up. And, you know, that was a blessing that we have that space. A lot of church plants don't have a space, or they have to, you know, rent and pay money and set up and break down. And so we definitely had some advantages. But the biggest thing was we had freedom to really be who we were. And we were authentically able to be who I was able to be, who I was, and draw people around me that also were included and invited into this environment to be them. Because we were doing something so different and innovative, it started to grow, and God just blessed it. God breathed on it, and people began to notice. So I just want to tell you guys that are listening right now, maybe you feel like nobody notices you and you're just grinding away and you're working hard. Like, first and foremost, man, God notices you. And if you're doing what he's called you to do, that's what's most important of all. But just keep doing what you do. Eventually, people are not going to be able to ignore what you're doing as God begins to grow it and bless it. It's kind of like that Matthew 25 scripture, like, you're faithful with a little bit, God will bless you with a little more. Faithful with that, God will bless you with a little bit more. And that's really been our story. And I know, like, you first got introduced the crossover really last year when you came to Flavor Fest.
Right.
I remember, I think you said you heard me on Ruslan's podcast and
Shout out to
started looking
Ruslan.
it up, and you're like, yo, I got to go to this. It's in Florida. So you're coming in at this point in the journey where we're already established, and you come in and be like, oh, wow, look at, we're in a former Toys R Us store that we retrofitted, and we're blessed in so many ways. But if you rewind and go back 20 years, man, it was humble beginnings. And there was definitely seasons we felt like, man, nobody's helping us. Nobody notices. Like, we don't have what they have. And you can start to look left and right. The grass looks greener in other places, and just water your own grass. Water the grass that God has called you to cultivate, fertilize it, water it, and it's going to begin to grow. And so over time, the church did begin to grow. And then about 11 years ago, we transitioned locations. We took over this former retail box in the middle of the hood on Fowler Avenue, which at the time was in the heart of this community. It was called Suitcase City because it was so transient, high eviction rate, a lot of homeless people, a lot of drugs, crime, prostitution. It's still a lot of that. It is getting better. The whole city is just going through a big redevelopment in so many different ways. But as we came here to this location, we really, being that we had this building now as a tool, and the location, we weren't in the middle of a neighborhood. We were like right on a prime street where everybody can see us, and there's neighborhoods all around us. So we began to do a lot of outreach stuff more than ever before. We like ramped it up. And I mean, we were just dreaming huge. Like, we're going to give away 1,000 backpacks. Like, can we do that?
Goodness.
And like 2,000 people showed up, and we're like, oh my gosh, like,
Wow.
And so we were just really able to do so many things at a much bigger level. And that's when the city and different organizations and people really began to notice, and we began to build even more relationships and partner with people. There's so much power in partnership. So because we have been partnering with people now for years and doing events together, like for instance, when the pandemic hit, a lot of our partners, they were calling us. We do this thing called Love Our City, this big serve week that we've been doing for years in our community. It's a signature event in this part of the city. We're not Suitcase City anymore. We're Uptown. That's our new rebranding. And so a lot of our partners started calling us. One of them, for instance, was Feeding Tampa Bay. And they're a large organization that provides groceries and food for food insecure families. So when the pandemic hit, they were like, hey, a lot of the food pantries in the city have closed because they're run by predominantly older people that are at risk for getting COVID. And so they've had to close them down. But we know your church has a lot of young people. Like, yes, we do. And you have a big parking lot and a big space. Would you be willing to set up a grocery drive-through? And we're like, that would be perfect. And so immediately, like the end of March 2020, we started doing this grocery drive-through. And they gave us pallets and pallets of food to where every Friday our team was separating them in the bags, and we were, giving food away to 300 families every week. And then as time went on, they had another food pantry up the street at USF. Well, USF reopened in the summer, and they said, we're not allowed to have our food pantry there anymore because school's restarting in person. And so can we move that one and combine it with yours? And we'll bring trucks and staff, and we want to level it up. And so we went from serving 300 families a week to 900 families every Wednesday. And so this was like tons of food that we were giving away, and it was free. They didn't charge us for it. Normally we buy the food. We have a food pantry. We buy food from them for a discounted rate, but all this food, we gave away over 1 million pounds of food in 2020 and 2021 in our parking lot. And we didn't have to pay anything for it. It was partnership. We provided the space, we provided volunteers, and we touched so many families. And there's families in the church today as a result of us touching them in the grocery drive-through. One lady, I just saw her on Sunday, her name's Judy, and she was here with her granddaughter. Her granddaughter, her name's Jane. She's 7 years old. She had never been to church before in her life. Wow. This is the first church she's ever been to, and she's been coming now for about 6 months. Her grandmother, Judy, hadn't been to church in, I think it was 20 years. But at the grocery drive-through, myself and a team, we would, as everyone's waiting in line, we would go up to cars. We'd give them some bottled waters because it was hot out when they're waiting in their car for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, for food. We're trying to make it a little easier for them. Say, hey, we got a bottle of water for you. How you guys doing? You okay? Do you need anything? And then we just let the Holy Spirit lead us. Like, hey, can we pray? Do you have anything you want us to pray for today? And so we didn't pray with every single person, but there was a lot of great moments and so many great stories. So the power of partnership is amazing. As people saw what we were doing, we got tapped on the shoulder to be invited. I sit on a board for the Innovation District to help make decisions as this neighborhood redevelops and changes. And we want to make sure that gentrification doesn't push everybody out. We want to give people opportunities that live here to level up and get new jobs and get training. So there's a number of things that we're working on, and even affordable housing things that we're working on to help people, because it's a housing crisis now. Everyone's moving to Florida. And so the rents are going up because the demand is there. But the lower income people that are already here, that live here now, it's really getting challenging to be able to pay the rent. I know it's the same way in South Florida
Oh, yeah.
as well. But really, back to the beginning of the question, being faithful with the little we have in our hands, and then God multiplies that. And we share that, we partner with others, and we meet spiritual needs, but we meet tangible, practical needs as well, because that's spiritual as well. Like, you can give somebody food, but if they're depressed and have anxiety and have all kinds of relationship issues, like, yeah, the food might help their belly, but there's all this other trauma and stress and toxic reality that they're in. So you want to find ways to holistically serve people.
That's so good. And just to hear the impact that you've all had and just the journey, it just began with, hey, you know what? We're going to have big dreams. And one thing I also want to highlight as well, I mean, you mentioned that you came into Crossover as a youth pastor. Yeah. You weren't the one who started the organization or founded the church. No, you came in and then you grew in leadership and influence, and you also had big dreams that I'm sure at moments could have been daunting. You, this past year, just released a book called Frames, and I've had the chance to read it, and it's absolutely impactful. It just definitely shifted my perspective, the lens that I look through different things, and definitely made me reconsider different things. While I know your audience were perhaps people of faith, perhaps Christians, there were definitely principles within there that is applicable for everybody. And one thing I do love about your work within Frames is how vulnerable you get. I mean, you share just moments of doubt and moments of mistakes, both small and pretty grand as well, and what you learned through the journey and how that's influenced you. Tell us, what was the story that led you to write the book, and what do you hope to see readers take away from the book itself?
Yeah, well, God actually gave me the idea for the book years ago when I took my very first break, a sabbatical, and I was at this cabin in the mountains in Pennsylvania. And God literally kind of gave me the framework for the book. And I wrote down all these notes and potential titles of chapters and what the theme and the concept and what some scripture background of it was. And it was a book that was going to be about perspective. And then we started doing this thing called Love Our City, and that blew up, and everyone's asking us to teach them how to do it in their city. And I felt like God said, put that other idea on the shelf right now. We're going to come back to that. You need to write a book about Love Our City right now and help other ministries and help people to really love their neighbors as they love themselves. I ended up doing that book and created all these resources for other churches and small groups and a small group video curriculum. It's on Right Now Media. I put that out in 2018, and in 2019, we came out with some more resources for it. And so that was a blessing. Before the pandemic, that was able to help so many hundreds of churches started doing Love Our City. And then even during the pandemic, Love Our City is still continuing. It's making an impact. But then during the pandemic, perspective is all about perspective, right?
Right.
You can see this as crisis, or you can see this as crisis with opportunity. You know, this is crisis, end of the world, or crisis with opportunity. God could do something through this. God's up to something. There could be a silver lining, right? And so that's when I really felt like in 2021, God was saying, okay, now it's time to go back to that other book that I gave you the idea for 5 years ago. And it's time to write that now. The book originally was going to be called Lenses. And just the way that it's spelled, and eventually as I was praying about it and starting to work on it, God kind of reframed it and said, no, like, call it Frames. And so it started to build off of that concept. And really the book has 8 chapters, and it's like a regular kind of frame that humans like normally look through, those kind of frames. And then here's the frames that God wants us to look through. So chapter 1 is pessimistic frames. versus optimistic frames. So as humans, we can be pessimistic.
Yeah.
We can complain. We can look at the negative part of it. We can doubt. We can have fear. That'll never work. Or even if we dream big dreams, then there's that pessimistic side in all of us that is like, man, you're just a dreamer. Or that's not going to happen. That's too big. You're dreaming too much. But there's that optimistic side. If we can begin to look through God's lenses and what he has for us, like we can dream those big dreams and we can watch God show up. We can pray big, bold, risky, faith-filled prayers, and we can watch God show up and do miracles. So yeah, that was kind of the framework, because I knew during the pandemic, so many people, their frames got fogged up.
Yeah.
Their faith frames were tainted. And a lot of people were living in doubt and fear and anxiety. And it was like, nah, wait a minute, man. We gotta change our frames. We gotta clean our frames off. We gotta adjust them. We gotta tweak them. God has a different prescription for us. We gotta update some things right now and pivot. And that was a big word we used during the pandemic, right? Pivot, right?
Right.
We gotta innovate, and we can see the opportunities. Man, if you look back the last couple of years, there's a small group of people that had the right frames on, that during this pandemic, they reinvented themselves. They thrived. Some of them started new businesses, or they totally tweaked their business. If they're in ministry, they found unique ways to innovate and do ministry in new ways. They did a lot of things with leveraging online stuff and technology. People started podcasts, right? People were doing church online, doing small groups on Zoom, doing all kinds of stuff with social media. There was needs, and we found innovative ways to meet those needs. Even like people needed food, we started a grocery drive-through. We used to do a back to school jam. We gave away backpacks, which we did like this past weekend back in person. But in 2020, we did a drive-through. And so you just had to innovate. And there were some people that innovated the last few years, had the right frames on, and they thrived. They leveled up, and God used them in amazing ways. And yeah, it's all about perspective. It's all about the frames that you have on. And I felt like it was the perfect book for a time like this, as we're coming out of the pandemic. I mean, it's still lingering around, right? But we have the right frames. This next season could be our best season.
That's such a good ending point. I think everything you just described about having the right perspective, especially in the midst of chaos, seeing that this is a chance for opportunity. God, what can you do even through this? I think can definitely shift us into a better direction, that even any challenges that we see that we might be dealing with personally, or challenges we might see out in the world that we want to pursue in making a difference. It kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about staying faithful with the small things, that we can have these big dreams, but let's also stay faithful. Let's take one step. Let's take one step in the right direction. And, we don't have to have it all figured out right now. Let's just stay faithful to what's currently right in front of us, dream big, pray big prayers, and just watch how things begin to change through that. In one of the chapters, 4 Frames, you speak about the perspective of having a temporary perspective versus an eternal perspective. Yeah. You go into detail of how you're trying to maximize every moment and every day. You mentioned how there was one person you came across who wanted to have a 500-year legacy. Yeah. Talk to me. I know having an eternal perspective is something that's big for you. What's the story behind having an eternal perspective for you? And what's the legacy that you desire to leave?
Yeah, that's good, man. Well, yeah, I've always wanted to leave legacy eternally, but it became even more real for me in 2017. I mentioned this in my book, where I lost both my mom and my dad in the same year, within 8 months apart. And I lost a spiritual father who was our head elder here at the church. And so it was a lot of loss in that same short period of time, but it really brought to my mind legacy. Like, look at the legacy that my parents are leaving behind. I'm living out their legacy now. They deposited so much in me. My dad was in ministry. My mom was in ministry. They touched countless lives. And I ran from ministry. I didn't want to be involved in ministry. That's why I said I went to Bible college the first year, just to say, all right, I did it. But second semester, God got a hold of me. He was like, nah, this is what you're supposed to do. And I was running from it. I'm like, I don't want to do ministry stuff, because I knew it was sacrifice. I knew it was sacrifice, and it was hard, but it could be a blessing. My ministry is very different than my parents in the way that, we were different styles, different people, different preferences, but they loved what I was doing and supported what I did. And it was great. And I learned so many great principles from them. And so in 2017, when I lost them, that became big to me. When the head elder from our church passed away, crossover is his legacy. And so the story behind him, he was 81 years old. Yeah,
Wow.
we had someone at our church that's 81. We actually have people older than that. We do have a few older people. They're the smaller crowd, but we do have some. And at our old location, the church started in the early 90s. I came in 96, actually. Crossover had started, but didn't have a location to meet at. Well, there was this church building, and the church basically was abandoned and falling apart. And one guy and his wife had the keys. They were the last board members left on the deed. And so they still controlled the property. And it was this guy, his name was Gordon. There was a prophecy that had been given back in 1979 that this church was going to be a lighthouse to the neighborhood, to the state, to the country, to the world, like an Acts 1:8 type of thing. And so he held on to that, like he believed that was a word from God. So even when the church during the 80s, it went up a little bit and then it like fizzled out. By the end of the 80s, like nobody was left. But he would show up at church every Sunday, open up the doors, turn the lights on. Him and his wife would pray. One or two other older people was there that would pray and say, God, send us a pastor, send us people. We believe that prophecy was still for real. And some people are like, you're crazy. Just give that building up, let it go. He's like, no, I'm holding on to that. And so he did, he held on. And,
Wow.
you know, along came crossover. And then along came me, and along came, you know, Flavor Fest, and our ministry became internationally known, and people were coming from literally all over the world. And it's still today, people come from all over the world to our Flavor Fest conference. And on Sundays and on the weekends, people are tuning in online from all over the place, because we have such a unique ministry that's done differently out the box. And so for like a Gordon, you know, like he died knowing like, man, my legacy is the church. And, you know, it's powerful. Like you said in the book, I mentioned somebody that I heard that was writing out their 500-year plan. I'm like, what? So what? Because, you know, like usually you're like, what's your 1-year plan for this year? What's your 5-year, your 10-year plan? Like we hear people that say stuff like that. Cool. But I'm like, 500 years? Like you're going to be dead, you know? And so like, you ain't going to live. I know we're going to be dead, but after I'm dead, like I want to set some things up with my resources that it creates legacy even beyond my life of living. And so this was someone that was setting up a foundation and an endowment. And I know the average person like you and me is like, well, I don't have millions of dollars to leave behind to do something, but there's still some things we can leave behind. For instance, if you write a book, like your grandkids and your great grandkids, and who, like, it can live on forever. Like the Frames book, like people could be reading that well after I'm dead and gone. When you create things for God, it can last well beyond your lifetime. And, you know, many things, many works of art and many things that are created, they actually get more popular and they blow up even after the person dies. You know, that's when people sometimes appreciate it more. So for me, I'm at this age where I've been doing this over 20 years, and I know that I probably have more time behind me than I have in front of me. For like me being in the lead, I've been the lead pastor for 20 years. I'm not going to be the lead pastor probably for another 20 years. In 20 years from now, I'll be an old guy. I'm older than you think right now if you start adding it up. But I want to pass the baton to the next generation. And so in this next season, man, I want to maximize every moment. And the older I get, the more I realize, like, man, I really want to make sure that every moment, every sermon I preach, every book I write, every song I write, whatever I create, I want to make sure that it's going to have maximum impact and that it can leave a legacy. And so then the last part of the question I would say is, when that day comes for me to pass the baton, and hopefully I'll still be able to be around and be a part of crossover and serve, you know, in some capacity, because I'm never going to fully retire, but I'll probably be coaching people and still writing and just sharing some wisdom. I'll slow down. Of course, as you get older, you can't run as hard, but I would pray that the church would continue to be a model to make healthy urban disciples, people in a multi-ethnic city type of environment, using the arts, leveraging outreach and resources, helping people in all those practical things to level up. Like, we want to help you win. We want to help you level up in your job, and find the thing that God has called you to do. Because really, at the end of the day, it's about human flourishing. We want to see humans flourish and be the people that God has called them to be, do the things that God has called them to do. And so, one of my crazy dreams, bro, I'll just tell you this last thing is we're in this former Toys R Us store, and y'all can pray for us. Hopefully, you'll come visit us someday and check us out. If you're ever in Florida, come through. But our goal would be to purchase this property. Right now, we're in a lease deal, and we have a phenomenal deal. We're getting this for like a third of the market rate. It's crazy. So God has blessed us, but we would like to be in a place where the owners would sell it to us, or their kids would sell it to us because they're older right now. But if we control this property, we would like to redevelop this property. This whole community, I sit on this board. I know all the redevelopment right up the street, 2 blocks away. There's a mall that's under a $1 billion redevelopment right now. They're going to be building hotel towers. They just finished this big residential development. There's another one going up. There's just all this stuff that's happening on this main street that we're on. And we sit on 5 acres. And right next to us is a rail line. And there's going to be a train station that's going to be built right on the other side of the tracks next to the church. There's 30 acres next to us. That's going to become a big vertical development of high rises with residential, hotel, offices, all this stuff. And we're right sitting in the middle of it. So we would love to redevelop this property and put up some towers that would address affordable housing, and build a new church underneath one of the towers, and have a school and restaurants and a coffee shop and dorms and a college, and multiple buildings on this property, but go vertical and just be like a little mini city inside of the city around us that's really developing. And yes, that's a dream of mine that God gave it to us, and hopefully it'll happen sometime in the next years to come.
One thing I love.
Gotta dream big. That's dreaming big, man. I'm dreaming tall.
I was about that's a good analogy. I was going to say just that, the fact that you consistently still dream big, that hasn't changed. You mentioned, hey, I'm getting older and so forth. And I think a common pattern we see is for people in their youth, dream big. And as they get older, they get more conservative, less risky. And yet for you,
I'm wanting to build skyscrapers, yo.
I loved what you desire for your legacy to be. We haven't had the chance to get into full detail in this conversation, but there's so much of what you just described, so much of it you're already living out, just empowering others. So many people have already mentioned, even well-known artists, KB being one of them, and so many others, just mentioning that they wouldn't be where they're at today without the contribution that you've had through your life and through Crossover and so many others. Just the impact that you're having, not only here in Tampa and in Florida, but really nationally and internationally as well. The fact that you've been able to experience some of what you desire for your legacy to be is absolutely profound, and actually just speaks to what staying faithful can look like, what it can actually cause, and what it can allow. I know Curtis Blow endorsed a book, and when I first saw it in the first page, I like, wait, Curtis Blow, is this the same one? And sure enough,
You know about Curtis Blow, bro?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Some of that's old school hip hop. That was even when I was a baby.
So for anyone who isn't aware, it's the same Curtis Blow that wrote the famous basketball song.
Yeah. His original hit was These Are the Breaks. You can look that up. I went on tour with Curtis in 2007.
Get out of here.
Yeah, man, that was really cool. And so to see him, perform some of his old songs and then do new like Christian hip hop songs and share his testimony. And he's been here at our church a couple of times over the years, and we keep in touch, and good dude. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
He's in his 60s now.
That's crazy.
He's
That's
a real
insane.
OG.
Respect. Just to see the influence and the reach you've had, I think is absolutely powerful, and just speaks to, hey, what staying faithful, what having a humble approach can allow, what taking one step can allow, and what God could do with it. One closing question as we begin to land the plane, because all of it's been so good. But I have people in my circle, and I'm sure you've experienced it in your life with people around you. There are many people who have big dreams to impact their world, to leave a legacy, and yet can feel overwhelmed just by the challenges they could come across, and even just ghosts that they could create. I know it's not easy to minister, especially in the urban context as well. It has its fair share of challenges. What would you say to that person who is dreaming big to create an impact in their world, yet feels overwhelmed by the challenges they face? What one step would you encourage them to take?
Yeah. Well, I love the name of your podcast, One Step. That really describes it and says it all. Like, man, the problems in the world are daunting. They're overwhelming. And if you think about the magnitude of them, you could get paralyzed and think, where do I start? And most people do that. Where do I start? I don't know. It's so big and overwhelming. And then they never start anything. And it's just a big dream that it never gets reached. It never gets accomplished. A dream is nothing without a plan, right? There has to be a plan. You have to pray about it and be strategic, have some people in your life that can help you even map out, if this is the dream and it's big over here, how do I begin to get there? What's the plan? What is that next one step? And then you just take that one next step, and you don't worry about 3 or 4 steps down the road that you have no idea how I'm going to do that step. Just take the next step and just take the next step. And you're going to watch as you take those next steps and you're faithful with the little, God gives you a little bit more. He'll give you the knowledge. He'll give you the solutions. He'll give you the connections. He'll give you the resources when you get to that step. So that step feels overwhelming right now, but don't worry about that step. This is the next little baby step right here. And just keep taking that step. And I can say that now. Maybe I've heard that in the past, but I'll be like, yeah, whatever. But now that I've been through that process so many different times with so many different examples, man, it's true. Just focus on the next thing that's right in front of you. And you can still have the big map plan and whatnot. And God might give you ideas for things down the road, but don't focus so much on those other things that you're overwhelmed and you get stuck. Just worry about that next thing that's right in front of you. For instance, writing a book can be daunting. It can be overwhelming. Like, how do I write all of these pages? All of these words? Start with a few words, you know? Yeah. And so a lot of times I tell people when they're asking me, man, how do I start writing a book? Like, well, man, come up with the concept, pray about it, come up with the concept, come up with the framework, your outline, what your chapters are going to be about, where the book's going to go, and then start writing and fill it in little by little. And just sit down and say, okay, I'm going to write 500 words today, and sit down. And it might take you an hour to write that amount of words. You might do that in 30 minutes. It might take you 2 hours. I've been writing for a while now. I'm like, okay, I want to do 1,000 words today. So the writing a whole book is daunting and overwhelming, but I know, okay, so Frames was 33,000 words. So that means I got to sit down 33 different times and write 1,000 words. And I just start and chipping away at it little by little. And some days I might only get 500 words because I'm not that inspired, or I got interrupted. I'm a pastor, an emergency came up, right? Or I'm a dad and something happened with my kids or family. Other days, hey, maybe I wrote 1,200 words. I wrote a little bit more than I thought. Man, I'm just on fire. I did 1,500 words. So if you say, man, if I could just write 2 times a week, 1,000 words, I could have my book done in 15 weeks. Give myself a little flexibility. Some weeks you might not write because things come in 20 weeks. You know, so then it's like, okay, I could get my book done in X amount of months. It's not going to take me 3 years. It's not going to take forever. Yeah. Like, just take that next step, whatever that next step is for you. And the other word I'll give you guys is be consistent. Be consistent, because that's the other part of it. Disciplined is the other word. You'll write that 1,000 words or that 500 words, and you'll do it for like 2 or 3 weeks. And you've got 2 chapters done now and you're making progress. And then like some stuff happens and then you fall off, and suddenly 3 months went by and you haven't written anything, you know, or you haven't done anything towards whatever goal you're going towards. You just got to continually stay on that path and keep chipping away. And so when people say to me like, my goodness, how did you write 6 books? How did you do whatever? All the different things that I've been able to produce and be a part of, and Flavor Fest we've done. I'm doing it for over 20 years. How did you do 20 conferences? Man, just one step at a time, and build a team around me, stayed healthy, stayed balanced as much as I could. And God just blesses it and breathes on it. And it's not always easy. So the last thing I'll say, one more thing. Yeah. A lot of times people get excited in the church world for harvest. Like, you know, my here, it's the harvest season. We're coming out of the pandemic and it's going to be a harvest. And so people are all like, oh, yes, it's harvest, it's revival. But if you know anything about harvest, and I didn't know that much personally because I'm a city boy, but when you grow crops and the harvest is ready, you got to go harvest it now. Harvest is amazing. It's ready, it's ripe, it's there, but you got to work to go do it. And so the harvest is here. It's a harvest season, but there's going to be some work behind it. There's going to be some dedication. There's going to be some sacrifice. There's going to be some long days. The result's going to be amazing, but there's going to be some hard work. We got to get to work again and watch God show up. The harvest is plentiful. The workers are few.
That's so good. That's so good. Thank you for that. Before we sign off, where is the best place for people to go ahead and get the book frames?
Yeah, I got one in front of me right here. So frames, we did something really creative and we actually put it in a box kit. So it's not your normal book. It's a book and a masterclass. So there's a video that goes along with each chapter that you can tune in. The masterclass is $99, but if you get the book, the masterclass, you get a free code to watch it. So we wanted to tie that in. Inside of the box, there's also even a pair of frames. Nice. Oh, these ones are purple. There's even a surprise CD in there from Reach Records. There's some stickers. There's some flyers. The best place where you can get the box, the only place, is translationleadership.com. That's translation with a Z. Because you know, we hip hop, that's how we do it. So translationleadership.com, that's where you can get it at. If you're like an Amazon head, you can get it on Amazon, but you don't get all the extra goodies and stuff with it. So
no, I'll absolutely include the link in the description. Yeah. But Pastor Tommy, thank you so much for this conversation. I'm definitely leaving better from this conversation. I know our listeners are going to leave better from this conversation, having their perspective shifted, getting a new set of frames. And I'm absolutely thankful for your life. And I just want to say publicly, thank you for being the type of person you are, who lives humbly, who lives with integrity, and who takes a charge to dream big as you're continuing to minister to not only just your local context, but even just a broader context as well. And we are better for it. And I'm definitely excited to see the impact we're going to be making together.
Yeah, man. Well, I appreciate you having me on here. I'm grateful for what you're doing. Praying for the marathon.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Thank you for listening to the One Step Podcast. Consider subscribing and follow on social media at One Step Podcast so you don't miss future insights for your one step in creating change. That's the number One Step Podcast. If you would like to be a part of creating change, you can visit onesteppodcast.com/charitywater. As you are on your journey, trust the process, because change begins and continues with one step.